is like a perhaps hand. Spring is like a perhaps hand which comes carefully out of nowhere, arranging a window into which people look while people stare, arranging and changing, placing carefully their strange thing and known thing here, and changing everything carefully. Spring is like a perhaps hand in a window, carefully to and fro, moving new and old things, while people stare carefully, moving a perhaps fraction of flower here, placing an inch of air there, and without breaking anything.
Edward Estlin E.e.Cummings was born in Cambridge, Massachusetts. He attended the Cambridge Latin High School where he studied Latin and Greek. Cummings earned both his BA and MA from Harvard, and his earliest poems were published in 8 Harvard Poets, 1917. As one of the most innovative poets of his time, Cummings experimented with poetic form and language to create a distinct personal style. A typical Cummings poem is spare and precise, employing a few key words eccentrically placed on the page. Some of these words were invented by Cummings, often by combining 2 common words into a new synthesis. He also revised grammatical and linguistic rules to suit his own purposes, using such words as if, am, and because as nouns, for example, or assigning his own private meanings to words. Despite their non-traditional form, Cummings' poems came to be popular with many readers.
Maggie and Millie and Molly and May. Maggie and Millie and Molly and May went down to the beach to play one day, and Maggie discovered a shell that sang so sweetly she couldn't remember her troubles, and Millie befriended a stranded star whose rays 5 languid fingers were, and Molly was chased by a horrible thing which raced sideways while blowing bubbles, and May came home with a smooth round stone as small as a world and as large as alone. For whatever we lose, like a you or a me, it's always ourselves we find in the sea.
No one else, Randall Jarrell claimed, has ever made avant-garde experimental poems so attractive to the general and the special reader. By the time of his death in 1962, Cummings held a prominent position in 20th century poetry. John Logan in Modern American Poetry, Essays in Criticism, called him one of the greatest lyric poets in our language. Stanley Edgar Hyman wrote in Standards, a chronicle of books of our time. Cummings has written at least a dozen poems that seem to me matchless. 3 are among the great love poems of our time or any time. Malcolm Cowley admitted in the Yale Review that Cummings suffers from comparison with those poets who built on a larger scale. Eliot, Aiken, Crane, Alden, among others. But still, he is unsurpassed in his special field, one of the masters. Cummings decided to become a poet when he was still a child. Between the ages of 8 and 22, he wrote a poem a day, exploring many traditional poetic forms. By the time he was in Harvard in 1916, modern poetry had caught his interest. He began to write avant-garde poems in which conventional punctuation and syntax were ignored in favor of a dynamic use of language. Cummings also experimented with poems as visual objects on the page. In April of 1917, with the First World War raging in Europe and the United States just becoming involved, he volunteered for the Norton Hages ambulance service in France. Ambulance work was a popular choice with those who, like Cummings, considered themselves to be pacifists. He was soon stationed on the French-German border with fellow American William Slater Brown, and the two young men became fast friends. To relieve the boredom of their assignment, they inserted veiled and provocative comments into their letters back home, trying to outwit and baffle the French censors. They also befriended soldiers in nearby units. Such activities led in September of 1917 to their being held on suspicion of treason and sent to an internment camp in Normandy for questioning. Cummings and Brown were housed in a large one-room holding area along with other suspicious foreigners. Only outraged protests from his family finally secured Cummings' release in December of 1917. Brown was not released until April of the following year. In July 1918, Cummings was drafted into the US Army and spent some 6 months at a training camp in Massachusetts. I have found what you are like. I have found what you are like, the rain, who feathers frightened fields with the superior dust of sleep, wields easily the pale club of the wind, and swirled justly souls of flowers strike, the air in utterable coolness, deeds of green thrilling light, with thinned new fragile yellows. Lurchened press in the woods which stutter and sink. And the coolness of your smile is stirring of birds between my arms, but I should rather than anything have, almost when hugeness will shut quietly, almost your kiss. The gladdest thing, you shall above all things be glad and young. You shall above all things be glad and young, for if you're young, whatever life you wear, it will become you, and if you are glad, whatever's living will yourself become. Girl boys may nothing more than boy girls need. I can entirely her only love, whose any mystery makes every man's flesh put space on and his mind take off time. That you should ever think, may God forbid, and in his mercy your true lover spare, for that way knowledge lies the fetal grave called progress, and the negation's dead undoom. I'd rather learn from one bird how to sing than teach 10,000 stars how not to dance. I was too tired to think. I merely felt the town as a unique unreality. What was it? I knew. The moon's picture of a town. These streets with their houses did not exist. They were but a ludicrous projection of the moon's sumptuous personality. This was a city of pretend, created by the hypnotism of moon night. Yet when I examined the moon, she too seemed but a painting of a moon and the sky in which she lived a fragile echo of colour. If I blew hard, the whole shy mechanism would collapse gently with a neat, soundless crash. I must not, or lose all. The early 1920s were an extremely productive time for Cummings. In 1922, he published his first book, The Enormous Room, a fictionalized account of his French captivity. Critical reaction was overwhelmingly positive, although Cummings' account of his imprisonment was oddly cheerful in tone and freewheeling in style. He depicted his internment camp stay as a period of inner growth. As David E. Smith wrote in 20th century literature, the enormous room's emphasis is upon what the initiate has learnt from his journey. In this instance, the maimed hero can never again regard the outer world, that is, civilization, without irony. But the spiritual lesson he learned from his sojourn with a community of brothers will be repeated in his subsequent writings, both as an ironical dismissal of the values of his contemporary world and as a sensitive, almost mystical celebration of the quality of Christian love. John Dos Passos, in a review of the book for Dial, claimed that in a style infinitely swift and crisply flexible, an individual not ashamed of his loves and hates, great or trivial, has expressed a bit of the underside of history with indelible vividness. Writing of the book in 1938, John Peel Bishop claimed in the Southern Review, "The Enormous Room has the effect of making all but a very few comparable books that came out of the war look shoddy and worn." I carry your heart with me. I carry it in. I carry your heart with me. I carry it in, my heart. I am never without it. Anywhere I go, you go, my dear, and whatever is done, by only me is your doing, my darling. I fear no fate, for you are my fate, my sweet. I want no world, for beautiful you are my world, my true. And it's you are whatever a moon has always meant, and whatever a sun will always sing is you. Here is the deepest secret nobody knows. Here is the root of the root and the bud of the bud, and the sky of a tree called life, which grows higher than soul can hope or mind can hide. And this is the wonder that's keeping the stars apart. I carry your heart. I carry it in my heart. I gave him a pleasant smile, which said, "If I could see your intestines very slowly embracing a large wooden drum, rotated by means of a small iron crank turned gently and softly by myself, I should be extraordinarily happy." Cummings' first collection of poems, Tulips and Chimneys, appeared in 1923. His eccentric use of grammar and punctuation are evident in the volume, though many of the poems are written in conventional language. The original manuscript for Tulips and Chimneys was cut down by the publisher. These deleted poems were published in 1925 as "And," so titled because Cummings wanted the original book to be titled Tulips and Chimneys but was overruled. Another collection quickly followed, 41 poems, also in 1925. In a review of 41 poems for Nation, Mark Van Doren defined Cummings as a poet with a richly sensuous mind, his verses distinguished by fluidity and weight. He is equipped to range lustily and long among the major passions. At the end of 1925, Dial magazine chose Cummings for their annual award of $2,000, a sum equaling a full year's income for the writer. The following year, a new collection, Is 5, was published, for which Cummings wrote an introduction meant to explain his approach to poetry. In the introduction, he argued forcefully for poetry as a process rather than a product. It was with these collections of the 1920s that Cummings established his reputation as an avant-garde poet conducting daring experiments with language. Speaking of these language experiments, M.L. Rosenthal wrote in The Modern Poets a critical introduction. The chief effect of Cummings' jugglery with syntax, grammar and diction was to blow open otherwise trite and pathetic motives through a dynamic rediscovery of the energies sealed up in a conventional usage. He succeeded masterfully in splitting the atom of the cute commonplace. Cummings, Richard P. Blackmore wrote in The Double Agent, Essays in Craft and Elucidation, has a fine talent for using familiar, even almost dead words, in such a context as to make them suddenly impervious to every ordinary sense. They become unable to speak, but with a great air of being bursting with something very important and precise to say. Bethany K. Dumas wrote in her E.e.Cummings a remembrance of miracles that more important than the specific devices used by Cummings is the use to which he puts the devices. That is a complex matter. Irregular spacing allows both amplification and retardation. Further, spacing of key words allows puns which would otherwise be impossible. Some devices, such as the use of lowercase letters at the beginning of lines, allow a kind of distortion that often reinforces that of the syntax. All these devices have the effect of jarring the reader, of forcing him to examine experience with fresh eyes. S.I. Hayakawa also remarked on this quality in Cummings' poetry. No modern poet, to my knowledge, Hayakawa wrote in poetry, has such a clear childlike perception as E.e.Cummings, a way of coming smack against things with unaffected delight and wonder. This candour results in breathtakingly clean vision. In a 1959 essay reprinted in his collection Babel to Byzantium, James Dickey proclaimed, "I think that Cummings is a daringly original poet with more vitality and more sheer uncompromising talent than any other living American writer." Although admitting that Cummings' work was not faultless, Dickey stated that he felt ashamed and even a little guilty in picking out flaws in the poems, a process he likened to calling attention to the aesthetic defects in a rose. It is better to say what must finally be said about Cummings, that he has helped to give life to the language. In similar terms, Rosenthal explained that Cummings' great forte is the manipulation of traditional forms and attitudes in an original way. In his best work, he has the swift sureness of ear and idiom of a Catullus, and the same way of bringing together a racy colloquialism and the richer tones of high poetic style. Maurer believed that Cummings' best work exhibited a new and delightful sense of linguistic invention, precise and vigorous. Penberthy concluded that Cummings' achievement deserves acclaim. He established the poem as a visual object. He revealed by his X-ray probings the faceted possibilities of the single word. And like such prose writers as Vladimir Nabokov and Tom Stoppard, he promoted sheer playfulness with language. Despite a growing abundance of second-rate imitations, his poems continue to amuse, delight, and provoke. Whew. Anyone lived in a pretty how town? Anyone lived in a pretty how town, with up so floating many bells down. Spring, summer, autumn, winter, he sang his didn't, he danced his did. Women and men, both little and small, cared for anyone not at all. They sowed their isn't, they reaped their same. Sun, moon, stars, rain. Children guessed, but only a few, and down they forgot as up they grew, autumn, winter, spring, summer, that no one loved him more by more. When by now and tree by leaf she laughed his joy, she cried his grief. Bird by snow and stir by still, anyone's any was all to her. Someone's married their everyone's, laughed their cryings and did their dance, sleep, wake, hope, and then they said their nevers, they slept their dreams. Stars, rain, sun, moon, and only the snow can begin to explain how children are apt to forget to remember, with up so floating many bells down. One day anyone died, I guess, and no one stooped to kiss his face. Busy folk buried them side by side, little by little and was by was, all by all and deep by deep, and more by more they dreamed their sleep. No one and anyone, earth by April, wish by spirit, and if by yes, women and men, both dong and ding, summer, autumn, winter, spring, reaped their sowing, and went there came sun, moon, stars, rain. The Cambridge ladies who live in furnished souls. The Cambridge ladies who live in furnished souls are unbeautiful and have comfortable minds, also with the church's Protestant blessings, daughters unscented, shapeless, spirited. They believe in Christ and Longfellow, both dead, are invariably interested in so many things. At the present writing, one still finds delighted fingers knitting for the, is it poles, perhaps? While permanent faces coyly bandy scandal of Mrs. N and Professor D. The Cambridge ladies do not care above Cambridge if sometimes in its box of sky lavender and cornerless the moon rattles like a fragment of angry candy. All in green went my love riding. All in green went my love riding on a great horse of gold into the silver dawn. 4 lean hounds crouched low and smiling, the merry deer ran before. Fleeter be they than dappled dreams, the swift, sweet deer, the red, rare deer. 4 red roebuck at a white water, the cruel bugle sang before. Hornet hip went my love riding, riding the echo down into the silver dawn. 4 lean hounds crouched low and smiling, the level meadows ran before. Softer be they than slippered sleep, the lean lithe deer, the fleet flown deer. 4 fleet does at a gold valley, the famished arrows sang before. Bow at belt went my love riding, riding the mountain down into the silver dawn. 4 lean hounds crouched low and smiling, the sheer peaks ran before. Paler be they than daunting death, the sleek slim deer, the tall tense deer. 4 tall stags at a green mountain, the lucky hunter sang before. All in green went my love riding, on a great horse of gold, into the silver dawn. 4 lean hounds crouched low and smiling. My heart fell dead